Before we get started with this week's content, please, if you haven't done so already, like, comment, and smash that subscribe button. Now, without further ado, enjoy this week's show. I'd been hiking the Appalachian Trail for 3 weeks. It was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime. Just me, my gear, and silence. I wanted the challenge. I wanted the isolation. But by day 20, I was learning that true isolation isn't peaceful. It's unsettling. You hear everything. The rustle of leaves, every creak of branches, the way your own heartbeat sounds in the dead of night. The first time I saw him, I was crossing a narrow ridge around sunset. A lone figure stood at the edge of the tree line, maybe 50 yards away. He wasn't hiking. He wasn't moving. Just watching. I waved, thinking he was another thru hiker. He didn't wave back. When I blinked, he was gone. I tried to tell myself I was tired, seeing things. But something in my gut told me I'd been seen. Really seen, in a way that felt wrong. The first real warning sign came that night, near an abandoned shelter. I set up my tent, made dinner, and scrolled through the day's pictures on my phone. That's when I noticed something that stopped me cold. In one of the shots, a wide landscape photo of the ridge, there was a tiny silhouette in the corner of the frame, standing just off the trail. Same shape as the man I'd seen earlier. I hadn't noticed him when I took the photo. A chill slid down my spine. I zipped my tent all the way, shoved my phone deep in my sleeping bag, and told myself I was being dramatic. Just a random hiker, I thought. But around 2 a.m. I woke to the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crunching on the dirt path just beyond my tent. I held my breath. Then I heard a low whistle, long, rising and falling. I gripped the knife I kept near my sleeping bag. My chest was pounding. I wanted to call out, but something told me not to. After maybe a minute, the footsteps faded, but I didn't sleep again. The next morning, I packed up fast. As I rolled my tent, I found something at the edge of the fire pit that hadn't been there when I went to bed. A flat rock, carefully placed. Carved into it, with something sharp, was the word camp. Not a threat, not exactly, but a message. For me. I shoved it into my pack to show someone later. Then I hiked, fast. I covered nearly 25 miles that day, desperate to get to a shelter with other people. When I finally reached a site near a spring, I was relieved to see a father and his teenage son there. I camped close to them, forcing a laugh when I told them about some guy who seemed to be following me. The father didn't laugh. He said, "There's been talk of a man out here harassing hikers. He doesn't use the trails, stays just off them. We've been keeping an eye out." That night I felt safer knowing they were close, but around 11 p.m., we all woke to the same sound, a low whistle from the woods. The father grabbed the flashlight and scanned the trees. 2 bright eyes reflected back just for a second, and then disappeared. We barely slept. The next day, the father and son decided to leave the trail early and find a ranger station. I stayed behind, thinking I could push through to the next town by nightfall. By 8 p.m., I was still 6 miles away, the sky almost black. I was exhausted. I decided to stop at an old shelter marked on my map. When I got there, my stomach dropped. It looked lived in. Not by hikers, but by someone who had been there a while. There was a pile of animal bones near the fire pit, a stained sleeping bag in the corner, a glass jar with something unidentifiable floating inside. And on the far wall, carved into the wood, were words scratched deep. "Stay tonight." Every nerve in my body screamed to leave, but I was too tired, too far from anywhere else. I set up my tent a little ways from the shelter, keeping my knife in hand the whole time. Around 1 a.m., I woke to the sound of breathing. Not far, just outside my tent. I froze, my hand trembling around the knife. A shadow moved across the fabric of the tent, slow, deliberate. Then, a whisper, "Why are you here?" My throat tightened. I didn't answer. The shadow lingered for what felt like forever. Then, finally, footsteps retreated. Leaves crunched. Silence. I packed up before sunrise, barely able to breathe. Every step of that morning's hike felt like I was being watched. At one point, I heard the whistle again, faint but closer this time. When I finally reached the next road crossing, there was a silver truck parked near the trailhead. A man leaned against it. The same man. Faded green jacket, hollow eyes. He didn't move as I approached, didn't blink, just watched me, as if I wasn't supposed to be there. I bolted past him, out onto the highway, and flagged down the first car I saw. A couple driving to town picked me up. I didn't stop shaking until we were 20 miles away. I never went back to the Appalachian Trail. My gear is still in storage, covered in dust. Sometimes I wake up at night, convinced I hear that whistle outside my window. And sometimes, when I scroll through old photos from that trip, I think I see him, blurry, just at the edge of the frame, like he was there the whole time, waiting. I'd always wanted to hike part of the Appalachian Trail, but never alone. My best friend, Sarah, agreed to join me for a 2-week stretch that would take us through some of the most remote parts of Virginia's trail section. We weren't rookies. We'd both camped and backpacked before, but we underestimated how empty it could feel out there. After the first couple of days, we realized we'd gone 48 hours without seeing a single other hiker. No rangers, no signs of civilization. That emptiness started to feel less like freedom and more like being forgotten. On our 4th night, we stopped at a campsite near a small stream. It was perfect. Flat ground, plenty of trees for hanging food, and clear skies. We cooked dinner, laughed about how gross we smelled, and zipped into our tents just after dark. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to Sarah whispering my name. "Did you hear that?" I held still. At first I didn't. Then I did. Footsteps. Not animal footsteps. Heavy, human ones. Slow and crunching, circling the camp. I whispered, "Hello?" No answer. Just silence. We stayed awake for an hour, knives in hand, barely breathing. Nothing happened. Eventually, we both fell back asleep. The next morning, I found something propped against my backpack, a photograph, printed on glossy paper, edges slightly damp. It was us, from the night before. We were sitting by the fire, unaware, eating dinner. My stomach turned to ice. I hadn't brought a camera like that, neither had Sarah. Someone had been close enough to take that photo, close enough to see us clearly, and then left it where we would find it. We packed up in record time, refusing to talk about what it meant. We told ourselves it was a prank, maybe another hiker we didn't notice. But as we hiked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every time I turned, I swore I saw movement in the trees. Once I thought I saw a figure, tall, wearing a dark jacket, standing way back in the woods. When I blinked, it was gone. By nightfall, we decided to stay in a lean-to shelter about 15 miles away. It felt safer, more open. We made a small fire, trying to laugh about the creepy photo guy. When I woke the next morning, I found another photograph. This one was placed inside my boots. It showed us sleeping in our tents. Sarah's hand trembled when she saw it. "We have to get out of here." We planned to push to the next highway crossing the following day, hoping to hitch a ride to town. It was 25 miles. We started at dawn, but the woods felt wrong, too quiet, like even the birds were watching. By late afternoon, we heard footsteps again, not far behind us. When we stopped, they stopped. When we moved, they started again. Sarah turned suddenly and shouted, "We know you're there!" Silence. Then, faintly, a whistle. Long, slow, mocking. We didn't run. Running in those woods would get you hurt. But we pushed as fast as we could. Around 6 p.m. we saw something on the trail ahead. Another photograph. This one was wedged between two rocks. It was Sarah, taken just minutes earlier. She was on the trail, wearing the same clothes, in the same light. Someone had been ahead of us, waiting. By nightfall, we were still 7 miles from the highway. We had no choice but to camp. We found a clearing, set up the tents side by side, and kept a small fire burning. Neither of us spoke much. Every snap of a twig made me grip my knife harder. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of a zipper. Not mine. Sarah's tent was half open. I whispered her name. She was still inside, asleep. Then I saw him. A figure crouched near her tent door, half in shadow, holding something shiny, maybe a camera, maybe a knife. I screamed. The figure bolted into the woods, crashing through the brush. Sarah woke in panic, and we didn't waste time. We packed everything in 5 minutes and hiked through the night, guided by our headlamps, barely speaking, just moving. When we finally reached the highway the next morning, we were shaking, filthy, and exhausted. We flagged down a trucker and begged for a ride into town. The police took our statements. We showed them the photos we'd kept. They said they'd heard similar stories over the years, people living off the trail, watching hikers. They promised to investigate, but they didn't sound confident. To this day, I don't know who that man was, or how many nights he stood watching us sleep. Sometimes I dream about waking up and seeing a camera flash through the mesh of my tent, and I wonder if somewhere there are still more photos of us. Photos we never found. There were 4 of us, me, Mark, Jenna, and Tyler. We thought we knew what we were signing up for when we planned this week-long hike on the Appalachian Trail. 60 miles of quiet woods, starry nights, nothing but the sound of nature. But out there, when the silence goes on too long, you start to realize just how small you are and how easy it would be for something bad to happen without anyone ever knowing. By the 3rd day, we'd already stopped seeing other hikers. No friendly nods, no conversations at water refills. Just us, surrounded by miles of forest, so dense it felt like the world outside no longer existed. We were pushing for a marked campsite near a creek that evening. By the time we reached it, the last of the daylight was bleeding out of the sky. At first, we thought the site was taken. 2 tents were already set up near the fire pit. But when we got closer, we saw the tents weren't pitched properly. One was half collapsed, the fabric slashed down the side. The other had been trampled, like someone had stepped on it over and over. The fire pit was full of ashes, but they were cold and scattered, as if the fire had been stamped out in a hurry. A cooking pot sat on its side, its contents, something unrecognizable, rotten, crawling with flies. "What the hell?" Jenna whispered. Then we saw the backpack. It lay about 10 feet from the tents, torn wide open, its contents strewn across the dirt, clothes, socks, a water filter. The weirdest part, the food bag was untouched. Bears rip into food, but this looked deliberate. The cuts on the pack were too clean, like made with a blade. Mark crouched beside it, examining the straps. Not animals. Someone did this. The unease crept over us like a cold shadow. Tyler forced a laugh, saying maybe someone just got pissed at their gear, but no one bought it. The whole place felt wrong, like something bad had happened here, and the air hadn't forgotten. We decided to set our tents as far as we could from the collapsed ones. As I drove my stakes into the dirt, I saw Jenna staring into the tree line. "Did you hear that?" she asked suddenly. I froze. We all listened. For a second, nothing. Then, a branch snapping. Not close, but close enough to know it wasn't wind. Mark shook his head. Probably a deer, but his voice wasn't convincing. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound, every rustle of leaves set my nerves on fire. Around 1 a.m., I heard slow footsteps on the trail, heavy, deliberate. Then I saw it through my tent fabric, a shadow passing by. My breath caught. Whoever it was didn't stop or call out. I waited for the sound to fade, but instead it circled the clearing, around and around. Then silence. I gripped my knife until my knuckles hurt and stayed awake until dawn. When the morning came, I wanted to pack up and leave, but before I could, Jenna let out a shaky breath. "Look at this," she said, holding something in her hand. A Polaroid photo. It was lying on the ground, right where we'd all been sitting by the fire. The photo was of us, from last night. We were sitting around eating dinner, laughing. Someone had been watching, close enough to take that picture, and we hadn't seen them. We hiked hard that day, barely speaking, too freaked out to even eat. By late afternoon, we found another campsite. It was empty, or so we thought. When I bent down to clear the ground for my sleeping bag, I saw something buried under the leaves, another Polaroid. This one was worse. It showed Jenna, taken from behind as she was walking. It was from earlier that day. The photo had been developed and left here before we even arrived. I felt sick. Someone was following us. That night we didn't laugh or make a fire. We sat in the dark, whispering, taking shifts, watching the woods. Around 3 a.m. I saw movement, just at the edge of the tree line, a figure standing perfectly still. Tall, I couldn't make out the face. I froze, too scared to even nudge Mark awake. The figure stayed there for minutes, just watching, and then melted back into the dark. The next morning, Tyler's pack was gone. At first, we thought he moved it, but then we realized something was wrong. His boots were missing too. "Tyler!" Mark shouted, but only the trees answered. We split up looking for him. About 100 yards from camp, I found his boots. They were placed neatly side by side. Between them was another Polaroid. This one made my stomach lurch. It was Tyler, asleep in his tent, taken sometime during the night. We grabbed what we could carry and ran. No breakfast, no break, just ran. The feeling of being hunted clung to us like a second skin. Every time a twig snapped, I imagined someone right behind me, reaching out. We made it to a ranger station 12 miles away, ragged and breathless. We told them everything. They sent search teams for Tyler. 2 days later, they found his backpack shredded and his sleeping bag near a creek. But not him. I can't forget those Polaroids. Whoever that was, they were close enough to stand over us in the dark, camera in hand, taking photos while we slept. And every time I close my eyes, I imagine someone standing just out of sight, waiting for me to look away. The plan was simple. 2 friends, 1 car, and a week-long drive through the Appalachian backroads. It was supposed to be scenic. Fall leaves, small diners, nights camping under the stars. My best friend Eric handled the driving while I navigated. We were halfway through West Virginia, somewhere between towns so small they didn't even show up on our GPS, when we saw him. A man, standing on the side of the road. It was late afternoon, the sun slipping low, shadows stretching long over the cracked two-lane highway. He wasn't waving, just standing still, his thumb tucked in his pocket, staring at the passing cars. His clothes were odd, a grey jacket, dusty jeans, and boots so worn they looked like they'd been soaked and dried 100 times. His face was pale, and I remember thinking he looked more tired than anything. "Should we?" Eric asked, slowing down. I hesitated. Picking up hitchhikers is rule number 1 of what not to do on these roads. But something about the guy seemed ordinary, harmless. Maybe it was the way he avoided looking directly at us. 5 miles, max, I said. We'll take him to the next gas station. When he got in, the first thing I noticed was his smell. Not bad exactly, but earthy, like damp leaves and smoke. He sat in the back seat, his hands folded neatly in his lap. "Appreciate the ride," he said, his voice low and soft. "Not many folks come through here." "No problem," Eric said, forcing a smile. "Where you headed?" "Just down the road," the man answered vaguely. That was the first red flag. He didn't name a town or landmark, just down the road. We drove in silence for a while. The woods on both sides of the road were thick and dark, the kind that swallow the sunlight long before night sets in. I turned to ask him if he'd been hiking, but he was already watching me. His eyes were sharp, too sharp, and I quickly looked back at the dashboard. "You two from around here?" he asked, his tone casual, but his gaze unblinking. "No, just passing through," I said. He smiled slightly. "Not a safe place to be driving at night. Roads don't like strangers." Eric shot me a look and I gave him one back, the kind that says, "What the hell does that mean?" After a few miles, I realized something strange. I hadn't seen a single house, gas station, or even a mailbox since we picked him up. The road felt endless, winding deeper into the woods. Where exactly do you want to get out?" Eric asked. The man tilted his head as if thinking. Then he leaned forward, closer to Eric's ear than necessary. "Turn left up ahead. There's a shortcut." "There's nothing on the map about a left," I said quickly, checking my phone. But of course, we had no signal. "Don't trust those maps," he murmured. "They don't know these roads like I do." The turn appeared, a narrow dirt path, barely wide enough for the car. "Don't," I whispered. But Eric hesitated, slowing the car. "Shortcut," the man repeated, his voice calm but with an edge, like it wasn't a suggestion. Eric tightened his grip on the wheel. "We'll stick to the main road." The man leaned back in his seat, smiling thinly. "Suit yourself." 5 minutes later, I realized he was whistling. Not a tune I recognized, just a low, slow whistle that didn't match the vibe of the car at all. It made the hair on my arms rise. Eric turned the music up slightly, but the man's whistle kept cutting through it. Then I noticed something. His hands were covered in faint scratches, thin lines across his knuckles, like he'd been clawing at something. His jacket sleeve had a brown stain near the cuff. About 20 minutes later, the man spoke again, almost casually. "You passed where I needed to go." Eric slowed the car. "Sorry, where exactly?" The man leaned forward again, smiling. "Back there, couple miles. I told you the shortcut." "Well, we can't turn around here," Eric said, a little more firmly this time. "We'll find a safe spot." The man's expression didn't change, but his voice dropped lower. I said back there. That's when I saw it, the handle of a knife sticking out of his boot. My heart stopped. I nudged Eric slightly, trying not to make it obvious. He glanced at me, his eyes widening as he realized what I was staring at. We kept driving, pretending everything was fine. Then, just ahead, I saw lights, a diner, glowing like salvation in the middle of nowhere. I whispered, "Pull in, don't make it obvious." Eric nodded. We slowed and turned into the small gravel lot. The man tilted his head. "This isn't back there." "Bathroom break," I said quickly, forcing a smile. We stopped. My hand shook as I opened the passenger door. I stepped out slowly, keeping my eyes on him. Eric followed. The man stayed seated, staring at us with that thin, unreadable smile. Inside the diner, I went straight to the counter and told the waitress, "We need to call the police, now." I tried to explain about the hitchhiker, the knife, but when we turned to point at the car, he was gone. The back door was open. His footprints trailed into the woods behind the diner. The cops came, but they didn't find him. They searched the woods for hours. One officer pulled us aside and said quietly, "You boys are lucky. We've had reports of someone out here for weeks. Folks picking up a man who disappears on them. No one's seen his face twice." We left that night, taking the interstate all the way home. Neither of us said much for the rest of the trip. But sometimes, when I'm driving at night and the road is empty, I swear I can hear that low, slow whistle again, floating through the dark. Like he's still waiting for us to stop. Remember, fear doesn't go away. It just follows you home.